What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over several tips to hopefully help you play better and win more close range fights in Fortnite Chapter 6 Season 3. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you like to see more, comment down below which shotgun is your favorite so far this season, and if you would like to use my code in the item shop, it is EvolveJake, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So, Chapter 6 Season 3 is no different from pretty much every other Fortnite season, in that close range fights are some of the most important fights in the game, and often the ones that will decide the outcome of the game. This has always been true in Fortnite. Oftentimes, if somebody's a decent player, they're not just going to let you 250 to 0 them at long range. This season, even more so, because we have mainly only third-person ARs in the loot pool, so you will often need to get in close to enemies to actually close the kill. The biggest gap I see between someone who's like decent in close range fights and someone who is just not good at all is going to be how often they hip fire, because a lot of newer players don't feel comfortable playing and they don't feel comfortable with their sensitivity, and they feel like they always have to aim in these close range fights, and that makes it much easier for the enemies to dodge your shots, but it also makes it to where your movement is also going to be slower because you're aimed in, and that makes it easier for the enemies to hit you. So just finding a sensitivity that you are comfortable hip firing with in close range fights will go a very, very long way. When I'm making like spectating videos or watching somebody play, if I notice they have to like hard aim in every close range fight, my confidence and like expectations for them goes way down. So if this is a habit you have, I would highly recommend breaking this. There are times where aiming in would be beneficial, but if every time you're shooting your shotgun you feel the need to aim in, you likely need to adjust your sensitivity to find something that's, you know, good for you to hip fire with. That way you can track enemies better who have good movement and also have more control over your movement, because movement is incredibly important. Like, a lot of players fixate way too much on aim and like how much it matters to win these fights. And it certainly does matter. Like, aim is very important, but your movement and how you use cover also matters a lot, and just as much as aim in some cases. Like, I have entire videos made about movement. I'll try to link one in the description down below. But in any shooter, how you use your movement in fights can be something that really tips the odds of the fight in your favor. If you're fighting an enemy, it would be much easier for you to fight someone that just kind of stands still and doesn't do anything than someone who's kind of like jumping and sliding and moving all over the place. If you're able to use your movement to make it harder for the enemy to track you, that is going to give you an advantage in the fight over them. And a lot of times in these fights, if you're able to like break the enemy's camera where you like kind of end up slightly behind them or slightly to the side of them, you may just win the fight straight up off that. And oftentimes you're going to be doing that by like jumping and sliding behind them, kind of depending on the circumstance. But using movement well will give you a huge advantage. And it's another thing that just sticks out very obviously if you're, you know, watching somebody play. If you're watching somebody whose movement is kind of slow and sluggish and like not decisive, that sticks out and makes it to where like you could just tell, you know. Whereas like if you watch somebody who's moving quick and kind of loose and they're decisive with their movement, that player is typically going to be the one that's better at fighting. And using cover is also going to be very important. A lot of messy close range fights just kind of end up with players out in the open trading shotgun shots, and that will happen, but you don't want that to be the go-to. You want to be using any sort of movement as possible in close range, whether it's a rock, a tree, a door, anything there is, a car, using that as cover to give your opponent the smallest, you know, target to shoot at will give you a huge advantage. And the way cover works in Fortnite, the way the camera works, if you're peeking from the right side of cover, you have to expose less of your character than if you're peeking from the left. And so just using right shoulder peek consistently and navigating fights in such a way where you have that as frequently as possible is something that good players just kind of naturally do. And if you don't do that, you need to build that as a habit, because right shoulder peek is a huge advantage. This is also true in build mode. Pretty much all of box fights kind of revolves around like getting an edit where you have right shoulder peek on the opponent. And when you have good aim, good movement, and good use of cover in fights, you will be able to outplay most players in these close range fights pretty easily, or most like average players in these close range fights pretty easily. And that's why I was saying that like movement and cover use can be just as important as aim in some cases. At the end of the day, you need to hit your shots, but if you're just going to stand out in the open and not move and hit every shot, like, you'll win fights that way, but you'll also take a lot of damage, and some fights won't go your way. Another thing that you really want to do in Fortnite is going to be to swap weapons after shooting your shotgun if it is a pump style shotgun. This season, we also have the twin fire and the outlaw shotgun in the loot pool, and both of which are pretty solid. If you're using either of those shotguns, then you could just stick on your shotgun the entire fight because the fire rate is good enough for that. But if you're using a pump shotgun, the time between shots is significant enough to where you can swap to another weapon and get damage with that weapon and then swap back to your pump. And this skill of weapon swapping is something that's very important in Fortnite because more often than not, we've had a pump shotgun meta where the pump is meta. And so think about it like this. If you have one player that's just shooting their shotgun, waiting for it to shoot again, and then shooting it again, right? That player is going to get some amount of damage. And then you have another player who's shooting their pump, swapping to a spray weapon during the time where the pump is unusable anyways, and then swapping back to their pump when it's ready to go. That second player is just going to be dealing out more damage because they're filling that time between pump shots with some sort of spray weapon. And you do need to get the timing down for this to where like you know how many AR shots or you know how long to stick on your AR before swapping back to the pump. And then also timing it well enough to do that, but also like maintaining good aim in that time. But this is another skill that's very important that can kind of go underrated. Like how good your weapon swapping is something that will tip the odds of a close range fight in your favor. Especially those more messy fights. If you're playing a right shoulder peek and the enemy's kind of pushing into you, then you might just be able to like pop out, shoot a shotgun shot, go back into cover, and then pop out again. But in those messier fights or the more chaotic fights, the player who swaps better and times those swaps better can be the one who, you know, gets an advantage for themselves. And pretty much all of winning fights consistently in this game is just getting more advantages for yourself over the course of the fight to the point where they add up to where you just easily win. You know, if your aim is better, that's an advantage for you. If you use your movement better, that's an advantage. If you use cover better, that's an advantage. If your weapon swapping is better, that's another advantage. And all of these add up to make you, you know, a better player, but also the one that ends up winning the fight when you use all of these things effectively. One thing that I think a lot of newer players struggle with is that they just go for headshots with their shotgun because that makes the most sense. Shotgun or headshots are going to give you a bonus multiplier to your damage. So obviously you want to hit to the head to do as much damage as possible. But the way the shotguns work in Fortnite is you get some amount of damage for every pellet that you hit on the opponent. And in some cases, you might end up missing more pellets because you're going for headshots. And this would be especially true with the shotguns that have a larger reticle, like the twin fire auto shotgun and the outlaw shotgun. The spread of pellets can be quite large. So if you just put the dot that's in the center of your crosshair, if you put that on like the opponent's forehead, sure, that dot is on their forehead, but the entire like top half of your crosshair is just on air, not going to hit anything, right? So if you're using something that has a larger reticle, you might want to put the dot that's in the center of your crosshair on like their upper chest, like neck area. That way the lower part of your crosshair still hits their body, and the top half of your crosshair, instead of being on air, is the one that gets headshots. Something like the Sentinel pump, which has a smaller reticle, you can, you know, more consistently go for headshots for. But if you have a larger shotgun reticle, sometimes just hitting as many pellets as you can hit is going to matter more than hitting headshots, because the more pellets you hit, the more damage you do. If you hit 2 pellets both to the head, that's great, but that's not very much damage. Somebody that's just hitting as many pellets as possible is probably going to do more damage. And that's why, you know, you've had players throughout all of Fortnite history that are confused why they hit a headshot that did 20 damage with a shotgun. It's because you barely hit any pellets, and so you got the lowest amount of damage possible. So knowing when to go for headshots or how to go for headshots depending on the reticle size is important. If you feel, you know, not comfortable in the moment, or you know the opponent is very weak, just maximizing pellets and getting a body shot can sometimes be more beneficial, especially with something like an auto shotgun, because the shots are coming out so rapidly. One thing that's different with this season is going to be the core medallion. This is on the island, which will spawn in second zone. When you eliminate core, you get this medallion, and what it does is it improves your sprint jump to where you jump faster and further, I believe. You go higher. And you also become invisible when sprint jumping. And this is incredibly overpowered in close range fights because you can basically just sprint jump over the opponent's head while invisible and really, really throw people off guard. I talked earlier about how movement is important and using your movement well is important. The core medallion not only improves your movement and like makes it more effective in this regard, but it's something that's very easily repeatable and very easy to do. You just sprint jump over the opponent, you'll go invisible, you'll end up behind them, you'll easily break their camera, and this is incredibly overpowered in close range fights. So I would highly suggest going for this island on second zone and getting this medallion. I think it's very overpowered. And the way the island works this season, spawning in second zone, if you have a fast early game, if you're able to loot your POI quickly and be prepared for island to spawn before second zone and then race there as it's spawning, if you get there first, you often will have a very easy time defeating core because it spawns so early in the game that not a lot of players are ready to go for it. And the core boss can also be defeated very quickly. And so if you do this very quickly, you have that medallion to yourself pretty much every game without having to fight much for it. And this is something that will really tip the odds of close range fights in your favor because, as I said, it's a good advantage, it's very impactful, and it's very easy to just rinse and repeat. You don't have to think about how you're going to use your movement as much or really fine-tune everything like fight to fight or make different decisions. You just sprint jump over the opponent, shoot them with your shotgun, swap to your spray, finish them, or, you know, do whatever you got to do. But the core medallion is a huge bonus for close range fights. Another thing that can really help you in these close range fights is going to be cars. Car fighting has been, I feel like, really important in Fortnite since Chapter 5. It was kind of a thing before, but in Chapter 5, they changed how the cars work. A lot of times, if you just drive a car up to an opponent, they will get in. And if you're the person who has the driver's seat in this situation, you kind of have control over how the fight is going to play out. And then you could just get out of your car and shoot them and then get back in the car. And then oftentimes they'll get back in again. And then you can get out and shoot them and just rinse and repeat this over the course of the fight. And car fights in of themselves are kind of their own type of fight at this point. But a lot of like what would have been in like an awkward close range fight can be avoided by like just turning it into a car fight. And then in this instance, I think it's very easy to hit shots, and all you have to do is time when you're getting out of the car and rinse and repeat. If your opponent is in the passenger seat, you can get out and shoot them. You want to not be too greedy about this though. As I said, oftentimes they will get out once you do this, and that's when they're able to return fire. So as basically the moment you expect them to get out of the car, you want to get back in. That way you have the driver's seat. As I said, oftentimes they'll get back in, and then you just rinse and repeat that over the course of the fight. And you can often win fights without taking very much damage because it's very easy to hit high damage shots in these situations. And a lot of people ask me about like why I used the basic G-Wagon SUV model for so long. And it was because I felt like the windows were a very good height for me just getting out to shoot an opponent. The Lamborghini I have now also has windows that I think are a good height, but I didn't like the big tall cars because when I got out, it didn't feel like as easy to just consistently land high damage headshots on somebody in my passenger seat. And then the final thing I want to talk about is going to be that these close range fights, even if you're good at the game and your aim is great, your movement is great, your use of cover is great, those are like the three main things. I think even if you do all of that well, these fights can be messy sometimes because the shotguns have such high damage and they can be so volatile. You might have slightly bad aim in a moment and hit a low damage shotgun shot while you're playing against somebody using an outlaw shotgun who just double bodies you for like insane damage both shots, you know? Or you might be playing good and fight somebody using the bird gloves this season that just melt in close range. And because of those things, like I was saying, close range fights are very volatile and you can kind of take more damage than you would like or lose some fights even if you are the better player. And so a lot of times the best way to consistently land or consistently win close range fights, especially versus like decent player or people having these more threatening items, is going to be to just start the fight with some sort of damage advantage, that being with like your mid to long range spray weapon. If you're just consistently jumping on people and kind of 50-50ing them with shotguns while y'all are both full HP, you can win fights that way and you can win games that way for sure. But it's volatile, as I was saying. It can go your way, it might not go your way. It's kind of coin flippy. And so the more you're doing that over the course of the game, probably the worse it's going to be, and eventually that bad decision making is going to catch up to you, or you're going to take more damage than you would want and get third partied even if you do win the fight. So starting the fight with some sort of opening damage and then pressing that advantage and getting in close and getting the kill is something I want to be doing as much as possible. If I open the fight with like 50 to like 70, 100 AR damage, not only does that make it so my opponent is weaker when I get to them and I don't need to do as much damage, and so, I need to do 150 damage, they need to do 250 damage, I'm starting with an advantage, right? but also you're going to be able to end that fight sooner, which is going to allow your opponent less time to deal damage to you, less likely to get third-partied. And also, the pressure that you have on your side is something that will not necessarily break a lot of people, but it will, what should be an advantage will be an even greater advantage, because a lot of people are stressed that they're already weak, they're already, you know, taking damage. You just put so much pressure on the enemy to try to outplay you, where all you do have to do is just kind of play normal. And a lot of people will just end up full running anyways, and then you can just, you know, get even more damage on them while they're running and maybe just win the fight without even actually having a fight, because so many people get scared under pressure or get scared when they're weak. And so what should have been like a small advantage can sometimes even be a much greater advantage, because you put pressure on the enemy, and a lot of people don't deal with that pressure well. But that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, comment down below which shotgun is your favorite this season, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.